Welcome back to the channel. So I'm carrying on from where I left off in yesterday's video, which cut out on me. Thank you for your comments. I would like to do a comments video as well when I finished these videos on the Do You Have ADHD documentary from Channel 4. And I just got up to the bit where I was talking about Vicky George, who's an ADHD clinical nurse specialist, and she works in private. She's a private specialist, and she was assessing Claire Mosley for GP on the documentary to see if Claire Mosley had ADHD. And I just left off where I was saying how Vicky George recommends that an ADHD assessment shouldn't be anything less than 2.5 hours, but actually quite often exceeds that. And I mentioned how I've heard of people only having a 30-minute assessment on the phone, and that doesn't seem right to me. It does make me wonder though how many people do actually get that length of time for an ADHD assessment, particularly on the NHS, which seems to be quite short of funds, and I think sometimes doesn't always give people the recommended length of time. Obviously, if you go privately and you've got the money to go privately, there's a great deal of variation in private practice though. I heard on another ADHD documentary, the one about overprescription of medication, that some private practitioners also only offer half an hour, so it's kind of very variable. But on a private, but then again, there are other private practitioners who offer like a lot of time, but then they're going to obviously charge more as well. I had my ADHD assessment done on the NHS, and I think I can't actually remember 100%, it was slightly over an hour, and I didn't actually think that was long enough. I think it might have, it was slightly over an hour, might have been an hour and a half, or slightly less than that even, I can't quite remember. It didn't seem that long. They were wanting to give me like literally the standard hour length or something, and I said no, I didn't think that was long enough, could it be a bit longer? And then they relented and said okay, we'll give you a bit longer. They actually changed my appointment to accommodate for slightly extra time, but they weren't going to give me any longer than that. And I did find that a little bit annoying because I did feel a little bit pressured, and I didn't really although I do think that they're right in the diagnosis of combined type ADHD. I felt that because I did feel like I didn't really get to ask enough questions and to clarify differences between ADHD and autism. It did feel quite pressured, and conversely, my autism diagnosis, by the way, was a different experience. That one was very, very, very in-depth, and it was also in person. Obviously, I can't see people in person now anyway because I'm housebound. The ADHD one was on Zoom, not on a telephone call, on Zoom, so at least it was on Zoom. Can you imagine having it done on a telephone, without even seeing their face? But with the autism assessment, I was very, very in-depth back in 2008 and 2009. I had my initial appointment at the end of 2008 for my autism assessment, and that was with a clinical nurse specialist who made a home visit and interviewed me and my parents. And I think that initial assessment was about at least 3 hours. It's such a long time ago now, I can't actually remember, but that was like the initial assessment. And then I had another assessment. Yeah, it would have been at least 3 hours. It probably was pushing 4 hours actually, because it seemed to take most of the afternoon. I mean, it did take a long time. And then I did have another assessment, my full diagnosis, which I got in the March of 2009. That was like the initial assessment at the end of 2008. And then I had another kind of more fuller assessment in March of 2009, which I actually asked for, by the way, because he was happy to diagnose me after that, but I wanted to have like a multidisciplinary team thing, just because I thought, well, if you can have it, I'd like it. And he said, well, okay, we'll give you that as well. Though he said, he says, I'm telling you, you're autistic, like that's my opinion, but you're welcome to have the fuller assessment as well, because I'm a very thorough person, and I just like that. If I can have it, I will, sort of thing. So yeah, we had another appointment at an outpatient hospital. So the outpatient of a psychiatric hospital. We actually had to go and get a taxi there because I couldn't go on trains at the time. I mean, I'm housebound now, so it's even worse. But back then, it wasn't as bad as now, but I couldn't go on trains. And then I overcame that eventually with support, and now I'm housebound, so it's kind of gone backwards. But anyway, we actually went there in a taxi, but it was like one of those big van type taxis because I didn't want to go in a normal taxi. So my dad actually ordered a special, like, almost like what do you call them, people carrier type taxi, which was really nice and spacious. But yeah, we had to go to this outpatient clinic, and I saw the full team. I was interviewed by a psychiatrist, and my parents were interviewed separately by a speech and language therapist, a psychologist, and the clinical nurse specialist, the person who did the initial assessment, was there as well. And then we all kind of came together and had a kind of joint discussion around the table, and that's when the psychiatrist said, yeah, she's autistic. It was already kind of like diagnosed anyway at the end of 2008. This was just kind of like I just wanted to have that full multidisciplinary team for my own peace of mind, and it just felt more thorough that way and gave me more confidence in the diagnosis. And I had further appointments after that as well, when I kind of put together, like, I did a functional needs assessment and other things as well to kind of like work out what support I needed. That was back in 2008, 2009. I think things are quite different now, and I think unfortunately thanks to austerity, it's harder to get that kind of really thorough assessment on the NHS, certainly from what I've heard. Which is really out of order, because you should be able to get a really thorough assessment on the NHS. So yeah, my ADHD diagnosis was nothing like that. It was I didn't feel it was long enough personally, or in-depth enough personally, and I did ask for a longer one, but they weren't going to give me that, unfortunately, and this was on the NHS. So what can you do? Anyway, but it wasn't, I think if that was my primary diagnosis, or like my predominant diagnosis, I would have felt more fobbed off. But because I already have an autism diagnosis, which, if you like, is my predominant diagnosis, as in that's my main diagnosis. The autism and OCD is my main diagnosis, and ADHD was just kind of like explaining the extra kind of problems I have in executive functioning areas that can't be directly explained by the autism diagnosis. It's kind of like an add-on, like the icing on a cake, so to speak, because I'm not taking medication. I think I would have felt it's a bit more dodgy if I wasn't taking medication. I mean, yeah, so it's slightly more than an hour, and I did ask like lots of questions and stuff, like going back to childhood and stuff. I just found it quite kind of pressured, and I would have liked to have longer, and it didn't give me enough time to fully clarify certain questions I had. So yeah, wasn't the best. Not like my autism diagnosis, which went on for a very, very long time. It was quite a different experience. So do share in the comments below how long your ADHD diagnosis was. I'll be interested to know, because there seems to be like a lot of variation around the country, and the same with autism diagnoses. I've heard of people getting diagnosed autistic in an hour, and I don't see how that's long enough for something as complex as autism. Like I said, autism is in some ways even more ADHD and autism are both really complex, actually. I think they're probably both as complex as each other, but yeah, particularly in a way, ADHD is more serious in terms of if you're going to get prescribed medication, and you certainly want to make sure that it is correct, you know. So yeah, great variation, particularly on on NHS and private, actually. There's a lot of variation. Sometimes you can get a better deal privately on the NHS, but not always. Sometimes you get a worse deal privately. It really depends. I think private probably has greater variation than NHS in terms of length of time, but NHS isn't always that great either. So yeah, let me know. Anyway, so where was I? So then it gets, as I say, so talking about Claire's assessment then. So she talks about how she often daydreamed at school, she stared out the window, she was asked questions like, so what about your mind wandering? And she was also, and the clinical nurse specialist Vicky George also mentioned how it's important to ask whether or not someone overcompensates. In other words, do they mask their difficulties from others? And that can also be quite kind of insightful as well, to find out how they might be kind of, overcompensating, because they might not necessarily appear to have a problem, but actually they do. They've just gone to extreme lengths to kind of overcompensate it. I guess an example for that would be, in me, is that when I was at university, I always got essays in on time, and that's kind of stereotypically what people with ADHD often don't hand things in on time, but I always got things in on time. but I overcompensated because I basically got to work on it straight away, as I said before, because everything takes me a really, really long time. I literally couldn't do anything else. Like your average university student would be able to write an essay, go out. I wasn't socialising or anything like that, by the way, because I couldn't. But I'm just saying, your average university student might go out and party, socialise, do lots of other things, maybe go to university clubs or whatever, and do their essay. I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I can only do one thing at a time. So I was literally doing that essay from the moment it was set. I was working on it, and I was doing it. That's the only thing I could focus on, and it was literally hours and hours and hours holed up in my bedroom, just surrounded by sheets of paper, all in an untidy pile. Just taking loads and loads of notes, like immersed in these books, really zoning in on it, not doing anything else, and it took me a really, really long time. That's how I overcompensated, because so if I had left it a lot later again, it would have been handed in late, but so I overcompensated because I knew I needed so much time. I overcompensated by doing it straight away, and then of course it took me a really, really long time, but at least I managed to get it done before the deadline that way. So that's how I overcompensated for it. And obviously also being autistic as well, I think autism can kind of, it interacts. Bearing in mind, as I said before, my predominant diagnosis is autism, so in other words I think I'm more autistic than ADHD. In other words, my autism is a lot more intense and pronounced than my ADHD. For some people with ADHD, it'll be the other way around. Yeah, autism won't be as pronounced and their ADHD will be stronger. For me, I think my autism is more intense and more severe than my ADHD. I'll say the ADHD is comparatively mild. It's not mild because it causes me a lot of problems as it interacts with the autism, and all in all, my overall diagnosis is very severe. But because obviously as it interacts with the autism, that makes everything more severe. But I would say it is, for me, I would say my main diagnosis is autism. So the features of autism for me are going to be a lot stronger than ADHD in my profile, if that makes sense. But yeah, so what I'm saying is, overcompensation, yes, definitely. And as I say, because things take me a lot longer, so just spending a lot longer on something, because I know how much time I'm going to need, is going to take me a really, really long time, and I hate having things hanging over me as well. I couldn't go to university again, by the way. Those days are behind me, and it was very, very stressful. I was so glad when that was over. And as I say, I was staying at home because I couldn't manage hall, so it's really like an extension of sixth form, and it was a very small university. I didn't have a university experience where you go off to halls or anything like that. I couldn't do it again. My anxiety is a lot more intense than it was back then as well, and everything's just harder, and there's no way I could do that again, just no way. And a lot older as well. I don't have so much grey matter, I don't think, anymore. That's what I'm saying. I only got to university as well thanks to all the help my parents gave me. It wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So I really struggled when I was at school with writing essays and stuff. Eventually I kind of cracked the code, but so masking. So Claire talks about how she displays a lot of the inattentive symptoms. For example, right back from childhood, for example, starting something off with enthusiasm, but not necessarily finishing it. But the flip side of that is hyperfocus. Not all people with ADHD have hyperfocus, and it's not actually part of the diagnostic criteria, but it is a very common kind of extra trait that some people have. And this is where you can become so absorbed in something that you can block out the whole world. I definitely have that tendency, but I think I had it more when I was younger than I do now. But yeah, when you get really, 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 this is seen in autism as well, though. It's not just in ADHD. This is an autism thing too. When you get really, really, really engaged or engrossed in something, you become 100% intensely focused on it. And I think that can happen also in autistic special interest, like, when I used to repetitively watch, like, Titanic on repeat, as well, that kind of zone of being completely and utterly tunnel focused, just like on that one thing. So Ellie Middleton, the self-advocate, says how she might sit for like 5 to 6 hours a day when writing her books, but when worn off for a month, she didn't write a single word. Again, like for example, when I was at university, hyper focus would be when I was literally doing nothing else but holed up in my bedroom intensively reading history books and doing nothing else because I couldn't do anything else. 24/7, that was all I did. Not going out or anything, so yeah, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on discussing do you have ADHD, so moving on to video number 2.